My name is Len Collin. I was a writer on London's Burning back from series 11 up to about series 13, I think, and I wrote about 9 episodes. I got invited by the producer to go in for an interview. I had been writing at the time. I had written on the bill quite a lot. And I think I was renowned for my research on the bill because I used to go out with the police a great deal in the area car and everything. And I understood that kind of workplace sense of humour, I suppose. So I got invited to come and meet the script editors, Emma Kingsman Lloyd and Colin Stevens, who were working on it at the time. We all got on very well. So I got commissioned on my first episode, which was series 11, episode 3. I can't remember what it was called, but I do remember what it was about. But it was directed by Joanna Hogg, who's now a very well-known film director and wins awards all over the place. And it kind of went from there. So once I was involved with London's Burning, weirdly I'd acted in it before. So I was actually in an episode that was directed by James Hazeldine. And my very first sort of job as an actor was working with, oh gosh, it's always typical that the name's on the top of my tongue, and of course it's gone now, but who played George. And of course it's Glenn. Oh dear. Oh, Glenn, if you are watching this, I'm really, really sorry. But Glenn and I had appeared together as two kind of criminals in a show called Rockcliffe's Babies. So I knew Glenn, and Glenn was trying to get me on the show as a writer, actually, for a number of years, because he knew I'd written on the bill and everything. And I suppose that's how, just sort of through the cast and everything else, I got invited to write on series 11. As a series writer on a programme like London's Burning, essentially you have quite a few meetings to begin with where you obviously have to watch the programme. That's the key thing. And I was always an avid viewer of the programme. Sunday nights was London's Burning for me. And I'd watched it ever since Jack Rosenthal's initial one-off play that he did. And I guess my familiarity, therefore, with the show, the fact that I loved the show, meant that I slotted into the kind of way it was written. The other thing that we had to do, of course, was research. So I think I went out a few times with King's Cross Fire Service. Actually, sorry, it wasn't King's Cross. Where was it? It was one of the Central London fire services that I went out with. Anyway, I can't remember now. Sorry, it was a long time ago. But of course, that was kind of like a childhood dream. You know, I'd been running around in police cars for the bill, in the ambulances for casualty. But the best by far was being in a pump ladder. It was an extraordinary experience. You get in a pump ladder and you go to a shout. And, you know, I wasn't in uniform, of course, because, you know, I'm not a firefighter. But you get in the back of the pump ladder and you got all the equipment on the back of the wall there, the oxygen cylinders, helmets and everything else, and everyone's getting in. I didn't slide down the pole, unfortunately, probably just as well, given my size. But you're sat in the back there and you're speeding along the streets of central London, and those things stop on a dime. But in the back of the fire engine itself, the pump ladder, you've got obviously, I don't know how many tons of water is in there or how many gallons. It's huge amounts, of course, but I describe it as it's like a swimming pool at the back of you. And as this thing stops, you get this vroom that hits the wall that you're behind, and you feel the pressure of this water as it hits the back of the fire engine. And it's those kind of experiences. And we went to a bin fire, and we went to a couple of small calls and an RTA. But it was invaluable experience, and you get the sense then of what it's like to be a firefighter. But by far the most important relationship was with my script editors and with Roger Kendall, our advisor. Roger was just an amazing guy. And this was, of course, before 9/11, but everyone remembers with 9/11 the thing that the firefighters said, and this is something that Roger said, Roger had attended the King's Cross fire, which is probably why I thought of King's Cross earlier. And what he said to us was, everyone else is running away and you are running towards that terrible thing that they are running away from. And that has always stayed with me as an image. And it was in my head then, obviously, when 9/11 happened, because you just think the bravery of firefighters is just extraordinary beyond belief. There is no other service that quite does what they do. So with the research, with effectively then thinking up stories, you would write out a storyline for your episode, which would go to your editors, which would then go on to the producer, and people would decide whether they liked that idea or not, whether it needed more work, whether you needed to do more research around it. And eventually you would get your commission to write. Well, you already had your commission to write the draft, but you knew which episode number you were doing, and you would write your first draft. Obviously, London's Burning was the type of program that always had serial storylines throughout, whether that was sort of somebody who would be leaving by the end, or, you know, sick note being sick, whatever it would be. You would have those serial elements that were already in your script that were plotted out in line with your script editors. So you knew what serial elements you already had, and you would try and pick a story, of course, that would sort of complement those stories that were part of the serial element. You would write your first draft, you'd be commissioned to write it. You'd probably get a 3-week or 4-week deadline to write that first draft. That would go in, it would be read by all the producers and the director, if the director was on board by then, though normally they come in a little bit later. And you would get your notes back through your script editor. You'd go to a meeting. In those days, we used to bike scripts because it was before the ubiquitous internet, where now we just send emails back and forth. But in those days, you used to finish I remember sort of sitting there writing my scripts, getting them all printed off, and the bike was coming at 3 o'clock. And if the bike was coming at 3 o'clock, you had to have that ready for 3 o'clock. And in it went in the brown envelope off to LWT. And that was it. You could then relax for about a week till you got your notes back. The week after, you'd go in for a meeting, and then you'd be writing your second draft, and the process would go over again. By this time, the director probably would be on board, and you'd get the director's notes for the third draft, and what would be considered a bit of a polish. And that would then go into a production draft. And of course, each episode as well, sometimes you knew in advance what the big stunt was going to be. So in series 12, episode 16, I knew that we had got clearance to do a story about a firework factory going up, which was one of the biggest stunts that I think we ever did. And I think that stunt cost about $1 million. It was some kind of crazy number anyway, but you went from everything, as you know. You probably, I am aware that people who will be watching this will know more than I remember about the show, because you're avid fans. But, you know, you do go from everything from a bin fire right up to those spectacular stunts. And, you know, that was something that was wonderful about the show, because it gave you, in fact, I think the most difficult thing for a writer was this was something that we had a lot. You would always have the pump ladder turning up, and it was supposed to be a spectacular thing in front of you, which of course was not always in front of you. And as a writer, you really wanted to write down what you would actually say in that moment. But of course, even though we were post Watershed, we never swore. So it was always, you know, you couldn't really go, oh golly, or oh gosh. So you're always trying to find inventive ways of the actors sort of finding their shock and surprise at the reveal of whatever this fire was. But I think actually it was a mark of the wonderful actors that they kept that fresh every single time they did it in the show. So that was essentially the process. And occasionally you could go and watch some filming, but generally speaking, because of the fire stage, things like that were sort of, you know, limited in numbers for obvious reasons. So I think that kind of hopefully encapsulates what it's like to be a writer on London's Burning. Yes, we did. We always worked very closely with the London Fire Brigade, particularly if it was on anything that may be contentious. So one of the episodes I worked on was where one of the firefighters came out as gay. So we worked very closely with the LGBTQ society that were part of, the Firefighters Society. And the two guys in particular who helped us with that were amazing. They were just great. They were in Soho Station. They were based, and they were every inch. They were probably the best firefighters I ever met. They were physically extremely fit, and it was the only difference really between them and any other firefighter was just their sexuality. But you can't be in a bunkhouse. You can't live that life as a firefighter without everyone knowing everything about your life, because you have to sleep in the station, you have to get on with the people, but you've also got to know. It's a bit like being in the army as well, and obviously I've written on army shows too, where the one thing you want to do in any emergency service is you've got to be able to rely on the people that are with you. And so we really worked hard on anything like that, such as the representation of Heather Peace's character as well, where we're making sure that we are showing it as close to we can the reality of what it's like to work in a fire service. And I think that London's Burning did that in a way that it all comes back to Jack Rosenthal, I think, right at the beginning. And we even at one point we had Jack come and join us, which was a great moment for me to meet the man himself, who not only with London's Burning, but with so many wonderful shows that he had written, P'tang Yang Kippa Bang, and just an absolute genius writer. And he turned up in this wonderful suit and white trainers on, typical Jack, But I think the day he came into the writer's room and sat with us was one of the best days of my life for sure. So this combination of working with the fire service, going out with firefighters, Roger Kendall as our advisor on site, we got as close as we possibly could at that time to representing what it's like to be a firefighter as accurately as you can within the format of a serialized ITV drama. What I do remember about that episode was I had actually sort of come across this story as when I was researching for the bill, which was about an overweight burglar who got stuck between two buildings because he's trying to run away from the police and literally runs down this gap between two houses and gets stuck there. And I'd heard this story and I thought it was a brilliant story. So I pitched it to Roger, who said, yeah, that he had come across a story that happened like that. And we worked out how that would sort of work, what you would need to do. And I think it came to sort of demolishing parts of the house to get the guy out. And I can remember sort of coming up with this scene, talking to Roger about it, and just thinking of the humour of the moment as well. But the fact that this poor guy, in the situation that he's in, having to be rescued, knowing that at the point that he's rescued, he's going to be handed over to the police and arrested. So I thought that was a lovely kind of dichotomy. And when Joanna obviously had filmed it, it was great to see how she interpreted the script and how that humour came across. So that's my earliest memory of working on London's Burning, and again, it's very much down to the script editors as well, Emma and Colin, who just always gave you the right kind of encouragement to know what you could and couldn't do, because of course, you couldn't turn up at London's Burning and suggest a plane crashes into the station and just, you know, run with that because it would cost a fortune. I did get to do a plane crash. I had a light plane crash in one episode. But you know, you were always trying to keep it fresh. You were always trying to keep those shouts a mixture of the humorous and the completely serious. And also, I should also give a shout out to wasn't it John Humphreys and Simon Sharkey in particular, who you know wrote much of the series way before I came on board. And I remember writing to Simon Sharkey sort of even before I ended up writing on the show to see if I could ever come along and, you know, be an understudy to him, if you like. But, you know, you were building, you're in a way, you're kind of standing on the shoulders of giants when you come onto a series like London's Burning that's so well established. So, so it was great to sort of finally get those first scenes done. And to find that you had got it right, that the actors liked saying your lines, that you had the right kind of feel for the program. So that was my experience of that. Yeah, that was Jonathan. So he and I had worked together, funny enough, as actors. So we knew each other quite well, and I was delighted he was coming on board. And of course, I'd written on Soldier Soldier, where he was playing the character of Chris McLeod, and then he was going to come on and play another Chris in London's Burning. So it was great to have him on board as well. I knew what he was capable of, and he's kind of a lovely kind of laconic actor. Who just has a lovely, easy way about him, and that was. I can't remember too much about what his introduction was, but I do remember it was a scene where he's watching the guys doing something and not too happy about with the way they're doing it, and it's a new broom coming in. And weirdly as well, I had also worked as an actor with James Marcus, who for years was in the show and was also in Clockwork Orange. So I really did have an affinity for the cast, and Glenn, who I've already mentioned as well, and Ross Boatman. I years later, Barney Boatman, his brother, I've played poker with many times. So it always felt like home. I guess Jonathan, and using his character name there now, and I guess Glenn, because I knew them, but also just I think Heather Peace as well was someone that you could work really well with. You know, when you for some reason we didn't always have readings of the script. I think it was a budget thing, but on some shows you'd have cast readings. So instead you had kind of like the wrap parties where you would go to sort of, you know, socialize with the actors and get feedback with. And so I got on very well with Heather. I got on very well with James Hazeldine when I worked with him, though of course he was gone by then. And the actor who played Recall, I always loved writing for Recall. It was I think it was the atmosphere on the set of the show when you did turn up was always very welcoming. And that was a bonus. And I think it was the difference between that and the bill, for example, though as much as I loved working on the bill was literally a factory because it was going all year round. And of course they were running 3 units, but the relief, as it were, on London's Burning was a much smaller unit. And so you could feel those relationships and those partnerships. And, you know, the green room was always a great place to be. And I can remember sort of all sorts of fun that we had in the green room. We had an actress once who was a psychic of sorts, but she did palm readings for everyone. So it was that kind of a place that when you were kind of in your downtime, there was always things to do. There was always a a kind of a party atmosphere. From my experience anyway. Obviously, being a writer, you're mostly sat at home and just hoping that your words are going to impress the actors and that they're going to like what you do, and that the directors also like what you do. And I also was very privileged to have at least one of my episodes, certainly that last episode, the series 12, Ep 16, that Gareth Milne directed. And Gareth Milne, what a guy. I mean, you know, as a stunt coordinator, he'd done everything. So, you know, what I loved about London's Burning was you had people like that who had worked on big films, knew what they were doing around stunts, and you had to have that because obviously, you know, when you're going to set fires everywhere and have actors running through, that health and safety is a major thing. So very fond memories of the program and working on it. There was one storyline that I personally liked, which was I just thought it was a very funny thing to do, a fire on a boat. And so I had this fire on this small boat. I think there was a research boat on the Thames that was connected to it as well. And London's Burning did do a few kind of things on the Thames. But in this particular storyline, I thought it would be funny to have this person who's rescued off the boat getting one of the firefighters to go back and get this item, which was a tin box. And when they retrieve this item, and they want to know, of course, what was so important that one of the firefighters had to risk further injury to go and get this box. And it was they opened the box, and inside is ashes, and it's the ashes of her husband, if I remember rightly, or his husband. I can't quite remember the characters, but I loved that. When I saw that, I thought it worked really well. And it was the kind of irony that the kind of stories that I don't know if I was probably told that story by a firefighter that something like that happened, and thought this would be a good way of doing it. So I really enjoyed that. And I always enjoyed seeing the big stunts. So the one with the light aircraft where that crashed, it was interesting to see how that was made to look. And it was often sort of the small storylines as well, where people were stuck in a lift, and therefore, you know, you have to talk to someone. So I think there were lots of fond memories in terms of the storylines that were done. And I think it's always the funny thing as a writer, and I do a bit more directing now myself, but the funny thing as a writer is you never know when you've written the thing, you see it all in your head. And I call it, you know, the lens in your head. So I, as a writer and former actor, get to play all these roles. I get to be all these people in my head. And sometimes my wife will come in and, you know, she'll be there with a cup of tea or whatever, and I'm like typing away and pulling faces, and she's caught me dancing and doing all sorts while I'm trying to write a script. But you're trying to get into this mood and this way of working where you're trying to be those characters, whether it's guest characters or our regular characters. And you never know how it's going to turn out when it's actually filmed. And it's always that joyous moment, because it's always like, oh, I didn't imagine it like that at all, but that's really good. Or, oh no, I didn't like that. But normally always on London's Burning, and especially with the fires, you were really, really impressed with what people did on the budget that we had. Because there were certainly other shows. I remember writing this fantastic chase for Thief Takers, and in my head, this chase was amazing, and it involved lorries, and it involved this girder coming off of a lorry, and I described the girder coming along and sparking, and this police car just stopping, and, you know, the whole Hollywood movie. Well, when I saw the film of that, how they had filmed it, and not, you know, not the director's fault or anything, but just it didn't quite work like that. And when this girder came off the back of the lorry, it didn't slide at all. It just went clunk. And it just didn't look anything like the way I imagined. It was still cool, but in my head, I had spent millions on this stunt, and in reality, it hadn't. But in London's Burning, because of people like Gareth and the DOPs we had, they always made it look brilliant. And I think it's when you look at other fire shows, like my I guess if I had a favourite fire show outside of London's Burning, it would be Rescue Me, which I thought did a brilliant job as well. But we had nowhere near the kind of budget that they had. But even then, you could see in Rescue Me, they abandoned quite often that idea of a shout in every episode, but we had to have it. We had to have that. It's what the audience expected. So it really is, when you look at the two shows side by side, they both have strengths and weaknesses, but certainly London's Burning, our stunts were top notch. I think just in general, just as I say, it was just always a very, very welcome place to be. So anytime you did turn up and saw some filming, you were welcomed on set. You weren't, sometimes as a writer, you're made to feel a little bit superfluous to what's happening because you've done your job. But it was never like that on London's Burning. You were always made to feel welcome. And as a guest actor as well, when I guested on it earlier in the series, you were always made to feel welcome. And I think that comes from the cast. I think it comes from the producers down. That I think the worst thing that happened to ITV was that they cut London's Burning. I know at the time it was an expensive show, and that ITV wanted to clear up Sunday nights for other things, but it was madness for them to axe a show, I think, that was so popular, and they'd love to have it now, I'm sure. And it was interesting, I think, when Sky did, I think they called it The Smoke, it felt like London's Burning light. They just didn't have the same dynamic. It didn't have the same feel to it. And I think that's because A, the genius of Rosenthal, and B, just all the productions and all the producers and all the staff, the actors, the makeup people. There was another, actually, I've remembered another piece that I really did enjoy, which was one of the lines I had in London's Burning, which was, who was the lady who was in the canteen for the fire station? Brilliant character. Lovely, lovely character. And I think we had introduced one of the girlfriends of one of the firefighters, and she was talking about some situation, and Maggie turns around to her and says, I guess it's a catch-22 situation. And the slightly sort of less intelligent girl said, oh no, it's much more serious than that, much more of a catch-32 or something. I can't remember what the line was, but there was just those little moments, those little lines that you can have. I'll have to look it up now, but you could always rely on this wonderful delivery from the actors. So you'd feel it in your head, you'd see it in your head, and they'd deliver it just perfectly. She was, a perfect example of a lovely actress who was in the show for a long time, never given huge amounts of things to do, but would deliver brilliantly. Thank you. I hope it's been useful. I hope it's I tried to sort of find some of my episodes to rewatch them again, but I couldn't find them. But thank you for having me, and good luck with all your endeavours.